Good morning. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's good to be with you this morning. Good to be with the congregation here at Wellsburg once again. I've appreciated the invitation to be with you and look forward to the week. As Dan mentioned, our subject for the week will be the subject of human suffering. And we're going to begin with an introductory lesson this morning, and we'll build on this lesson as we go throughout the week, Lord willing. So I encourage you to take a Bible out and follow along. And I trust the things that we have to say will be a benefit to each one of us who have assembled here today. Okay, I think we're ready to go. I was going to have to bring that screen a little closer. Look, I'm at the age where I can't hear, I can't see, so hopefully that showed up. I can do this, I guess. Okay, very good. Ladies and gentlemen, sometime in the life of every human being, that individual will experience human suffering, some to a greater degree and some more often than others. Atheists love to point to the subject of human suffering and use it as the greatest single argument for the non-existence of God, especially in their thinking a benevolent God who is infinitely good. The problem of human suffering is not irreconcilable with the love of a benevolent Creator. But I want to put that aside for the time being. We'll look at that a little later on perhaps in our series. But this morning, we want to concentrate on the subject of why men suffer. If I were to ask you what Old Testament character comes to mind when you think about human suffering, I believe the obvious answer to that question, and everyone would say Job. However, the why of men's suffering was not answered directly in the book that bears his name. It is true that the principles are set forth in the book that aid in an indirect way to arriving at the solution for why men suffer. But the book itself does not deal extensively with the why of men's suffering. We see the source of men's suffering found in the book, and so that means that we're going to have to look outside the book of Job to answer this question more fully as to the idea of why men suffer. As we think about why men suffer, let's first of all talk about the scope of human suffering. We need to understand that suffering may be mental, it may be spiritual, it may be physical. But I want us to also understand that nearly all, if not all, of human suffering is consequential, or it's the result of something. Suffering is the result or consequence, and I want you to underscore this now in your mind, of the violation of law. Furthermore, as we think about our subject, all the consequences of the violation of law are due to choice, either the individual's choice or the choices of others. Even in Job's case, his suffering was the consequence of Jehovah's choice that he allowed Satan to test him. The Lord acted within the authority of his own absolute Godhead. He has the absolute authority to test man or to allow him to be tested by another. Did he not test Abraham as well as others? And as we think about the absolute Godhead of God, again, we'll have more to say about that, Lord willing, as the week progresses. Do not underestimate the idea of the correlation between choice and human suffering. If you don't get anything else out of the lesson this morning, or out of this series of lessons, please get this, that there is a direct correlation between human suffering and choice. God made a choice to allow Job to suffer. Satan made a choice to appear before God. The Sabaeans and the Chaldeans made a choice. Job's wife made a choice. Job made a choice. And so if you don't get anything else out of the lesson, understand the correlation between choice, the choices we make or the choices someone else makes, in regard to human suffering. Now, if we lived in a perfect world, then every choice would be a good choice, and there would be no consequence, no evil consequence, no bad consequence to those choices that we make. But unfortunately, we don't live in a perfect world. And that brings us to the next point that I want to discuss with you. And that is that Satan, not God, is the the source of all our suffering. In Genesis chapter 1, you have three persons appear that play an important role in man's history. You have God, who is the creator of the universe. You have man, who is the creature made in God's image, who was given dominion over creation. And you have Satan, the adversary, who seduced man by enticing him to disobey God. And when he did that, he threw the whole work of God and man into chaos. Through his efforts, that is, through Satan's efforts, he brought upon man all his woes, all his sorrows, and all the suffering that has followed. You know, I understand we go through a grief process. When I lost my son, it had an impact on my oldest daughter. When I lost my wife, that also had an impact on my oldest daughter. She passed away in 2013. All right? And from the time that my son died in 92 until she passed away, that is my oldest daughter, in 2013, I tried to get her to understand this principle. And that is, it is not God who has caused our suffering. It is Satan. I understand that anger is a part of the grieving process. I get that. I understand that. But we need to channel that anger toward the right object. And it's not God that we need to channel that anger toward. It is our adversary, Satan. It is Satan, not God, who is the source of our suffering. Through his efforts, Satan brought upon all mankind our woes, our sorrows, and our suffering. It is interesting that in the first two chapters of Job, you have these same three central figures presented to us. You have man, Job, who's the friend of God. You have God, who is the sovereign ruler of the universe. And you have Satan, the adversary, who seduced man in the Garden of Eden and who now sought Job's destruction by alienating him from God. That was what he was trying to do. To find ground for testing Job, Satan challenged God. God asked Job, or rather asked Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job?" After he asked him, "Where you been?" He said, "I've been going to and fro upon the earth." Reminds me of what Peter said when Peter said that our adversary Satan is like a roaring lion walking to and fro, seeking whom he may devour. And that's what you see happening as the book of Job opens. Where you been? Well, I've been walking to and fro upon the earth. Have you considered my servant Job? That's what God asked Satan. And Satan said, "Yes, I've considered him, but you've put a hedge around him. I can't get to him. Yes, he's faithful to you right now, but does Job fear God for nothing?" is what Satan asked God. Or in other words, is he not well paid for his faithfulness? And so God makes a choice. He chooses to allow Satan to test Job, but with limitation. And so what we see as we begin our subject is that Job's suffering will be the result of God's choice. Satan, you can take away his possessions. You can take away his children. You can take away his health. You can even allow his friends to attack him. You can allow him to endure intense suffering, but you cannot take his life. At no time was Satan allowed to go beyond Job's ability to endure these things, and his life was also spared. God will not allow us to have to endure things beyond our ability. And once again, I don't need to be redundant, but once again, we'll look at that as we progress throughout the week. But Satan, you can have your way with him. Who made that choice? God did. Satan made the choice to test Job. God made the choice to allow Job to be tested. Underscore that, if you will, in your mind. Also, we want to take note of the progression of Job's faith that enabled him to endure the testing. In his attempt to destroy Job, I also want us to understand that Job's wife was used as a tool in Satan's hand, and his friends also were used as a tool in Satan's hand to bring Job to the breaking point, to bring Job to the point where he would curse God and die. Job's wife, for example, curse God and die. She made her choice. You know, she lost wealth too. She lost 10 children as well as Job. She made her choice. Job, just curse God and die. Satan didn't stop with Job's wife. No, he uses his friends. Satan chose to deceive Job's friends, and they in turn chose to espouse a false position. Job, the reason why you're suffering is because there's sin here somewhere involved. That's why you're suffering. You're being punished because of some transgression. Now, they chose to espouse that position. They present that position to Job. But who's behind it? Satan's behind it. He also used, that is, Satan used the Sabaeans and the Chaldeans who made choices and who, like Satan, violated moral laws that should have been obeyed, but they did not obey it, did they? No. And it brought suffering into Job's life. But did Job make that choice? No. The Sabaeans and the Chaldeans made that choice. Job suffered the consequence of that choice. Job's suffering then was the consequences of choices in the violation of law. You know, sometimes one's closest friend, believing his efforts to be right, may be Satan's instrument in seeking his end. Think with me just for a moment about Jesus. Jesus chose 12 disciples, known to us as apostles. Among those 12 disciples, there was an inner circle. That's how we defined it. You oftentimes see Jesus with that inner circle. You see Jesus with that inner circle on the Mount of Transfiguration. Who's in that inner circle? Well, we know it's Peter, James, and John, don't we? In Matthew chapter 16, Jesus is teaching his disciples a lesson concerning the church there at Caesarea Philippi. And he's teaching them a lesson concerning the foundation upon which the church would rest. And he asked the question, whom do men say that I am? And they gave him this answer that, well, some say that thou art John the Baptist, and they go down through a list, but who do you say that I am? And then Peter, one of the members of that inner circle, said that thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. Jesus said, blessed art thou, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood hath not revealed this to you, but my Father which is in heaven. And I say unto you that thou art Peter, and upon this rock, or upon the confession that Peter, a member of this inner circle, had just made, that he is the Christ, the Son of the living God. That foundation is what the church rests upon. But if you drop down just a few verses, you see where Jesus said, I must go to Jerusalem, and there I will suffer at the hands of the scribes and the priests, and I will be put to death. And then you have Peter, who just made that confession. A member of that inner circle, one of Jesus' closest friends, turn right around and say, "Far be it from you." He rebuked the Lord. Who did? Peter did. He rebuked the Lord and said, "No, no, 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 no. This is not going to happen to you," as we paraphrase. And then what did Jesus say to Peter, his friend, a member of that inner circle? "Get behind me, Satan." Who was using Peter? Satan was using Peter. Who's our adversary? It's not God. When we suffer transgressions, yes, even maybe death of a family member and so forth, and we become angry, and I understand anger is a part of the grieving process. Believe me, I understand that. What do we need to direct that, channel that? Anger toward the right object. Look, sometimes we view Satan as a proverbial boogeyman. He doesn't really exist in our mind and our thinking, but he's real. He does exist. He is not our friend. He's our adversary. The very reason you stand beside a casket of a loved one is because of him. Not God, him. He's the one that threw everything into chaos. He's the very reason Adam and Eve were banished from the garden and have access to the tree of life. He's the very reason physical death entered into the world. He's the very reason you have Hebrews 9 and verse 27, which says it's appointed unto man once to die, and after this the judgment. He's the one. He is not your friend. He's not my friend. He's our adversary. Who was behind Peter's remark? Satan. Satan. Get behind me, Satan. No, no. No. The Father in heaven did not reveal that to Peter. Peter is now under the influence of whom? Satan. Satan. Remember in Matthew chapter 4 when Jesus was tempted in the wilderness, was it not Satan who offered him what? Glory? Yeah. Power? And you can circumvent or you can bypass the cross. You don't have to go to the cross. No. Wasn't it Satan? Here it is again. Only not directly from the mouth of Satan to Jesus. No, through the mouth of Peter, Jesus' friend. Cursed God and died, Job's wife said. Who's using her as an instrument? Satan. Not so, Lord. This is not going to happen to you. You're not going to die at Jerusalem. Who made that statement? Peter. Who's influencing him? Satan. Satan. Now, Satan may use false religion and servants who pose as ministers of righteousness. Paul dealt with that in 2 Corinthians chapter 11. He may do that. And if we choose to follow that, then we will what? We will experience suffering, yes, not necessarily from a physical standpoint, but spiritually. Remember, we may suffer mentally, spiritually, physically. Man chooses whether he will be influenced to disobey God by following after Satan, or whether he will choose to obey God. But understand, Satan's not our friend. Satan strives to corrupt. Yeah. He'll go after us. Look, he went after the very Son of God. You think he's not going to go after you? Look, as Job opens, what does Satan do? He challenges God. Does Job serve God for nothing? Is he not rewarded for his faithfulness? I'm challenging you, God. I'm telling you, your servant's not going to hang in there. Your servant's not going to be loyal. He's not going to be faithful. Who's he challenging? He's challenging God. You think he's going to stop with you? Or me? No, absolutely not. He's not our friend. He's a liar. And as Jesus said in John chapter 8 and verse 44, he's been a liar from the beginning. He's the father of lies. Look at our adversary. Look at the woes he has brought upon us. It is Satan, not God, who is the source of our suffering. On the other hand, he uses nature, that is Satan, by some power and in some way unknown to us. I don't pretend to be able to explain the mechanics of this point I'm making. I can't do that any more than I can explain the mechanics of the incarnation. Do I believe that Jesus, the second member of the Godhead, placed himself under the Father's will and came to this earth and robed himself in flesh? And what we had is we had the God-man. We had God who was clothed in flesh, walking among us. Do I believe that? Yes, the Bible teaches that. Do I believe what Paul said? In him dwells all the fullness of the Godhead bodily? Without question. By faith I accept that. Can I explain the mechanics of it? No, I can't. But by faith I accept it. Now this point I'm making here, I can't explain the mechanics of it, but he can, that is, Satan uses nature by some power and in some way unknown to us, as in the case of the woman who suffered for 18 years, recorded for us in Luke chapter 13 and verse 16. Jesus said this, Satan has bound her. In what way? I don't know. I mean, I understand perhaps the illness, I understand perhaps the disease, but how did he do it? I don't know. I can't explain the mechanics of that. Come with me to 2 Corinthians chapter 12 and look at verse 7 here momentarily. Corinthians chapter 12. 2 Corinthians chapter 12, look at verse 7. You know, you have a man here, namely Paul, who was taken up into the third heaven. I think he had a glimpse into paradise. I believe he's the man he's talking about here. And Paul needed to be humble about these things. And notice how this was achieved, this humility. Look at verse 7 here. Notice what Paul said. And lest I should be exalted above measure by the abundance of the revelation, a thorn in the flesh. Stop right there, a thorn in the flesh. You ever get a thorn in your thumb? You ever get it buried there? A splinter, maybe? Aggravating, isn't it? And it seems that no matter where it's located, that's the area you're always going to bump, isn't it? Right? Yeah. But this just isn't a prick from a thorn. What he's talking about here is someone taking their fist and smacking them. Hitting them, hitting them, hitting them. That's what he's talking about here. That's the thorn in the flesh. In other words, if I understand what Paul is saying here to me, he is saying I'm in constant pain. I'm in constant pain. There may have been some relief here and there, but it comes back. What is this thorn? I don't know what it is. Paul doesn't reveal to me what that thorn is, but he tells me I'm in pain. I've got this thorn in the flesh. It's aggravating to me. More than an aggravation, perhaps. But notice the next sentence. It was given to me a messenger of Satan. A messenger of Satan to buffet me. I can't explain the mechanics of this. How does Satan do this? I can't answer that. But that's what Paul is telling me here. That's the source of it. He's the source of it. Look, again, all of our suffering is not from God. It's a result of Satan. He's the source of our suffering. Has been from the very beginning. When Adam and Eve were banished from the garden, God said, look, the day that you eat thereof of this fruit, you shall surely die. And they did. You have two things involved here. They begin to die spiritually, obviously, and physically. Adam lived to be 930 years old, if memory serves me correctly, and don't trust my memory. But I believe he lived to be 930, Methuselah 969, but Adam 930. Whew. Man, I don't know how he did that. I mean, I'm 70 and I just let that out of the bag, didn't I? See, I told you my memory's not good. I wasn't supposed to do that. My wife said, don't go down there and tell him how old you are. And I let her know that's going by the wayside. Right? But they started to die physically. And since that time, death has been a part of our lives, hasn't it? But who's behind that? Satan. Satan. So look, he affects us spiritually, but on occasion, physically. How's the mechanics? I don't know. But look, again, Luke chapter, I go to these two passages. There's others, but I look at these two passages. I look at Luke 13. Jesus said, look, who has bound her? Satan has. How did he do that? I can't explain the mechanics of it, but I'm going to accept what the passage teaches. How did Satan buffet Paul here? By giving him this thorn in the flesh. I can't explain the mechanics of it, but it's clear to me who Paul said is the source. So through lying and deceit, he affects us spiritually when we suffer, through some physical power, or through some act of nature, he affects us. How? I don't know. I don't know, but I'm going to accept what these passages teach me. So if we don't get anything else out of this, understand this, that Satan, not God, is the source of our problems, our woes, our sorrows. And yes, I understand. I understand the grieving process. I understand what's involved in that. And as I tried to get my daughter to understand, I understand you're angry. But channel that anger toward the right object. It's not God, it's Satan who is our enemy. It's our Satan, not God. Now, I mentioned early on, atheists like to point to the idea of human suffering, and they use it as the single most, in their mind, most powerful argument. I think it can be answered, that argument. They say, how can you have suffering on one hand and a loving God on the other? When my son passed away, I had one of my uncles, one of my wife's uncles, my late wife's uncles, come to me and say, look, where's your God? Where is he now? What happened here? You claim this. It's kind of like Job's wife coming to him, isn't it? Kind of like his friends coming to him. So we're going to deal with this. We understand this. And you've more likely experienced the same. But we need to understand who our enemy is. Understanding these things, I believe, goes a long way in helping us. I want to continue on here. Perhaps we might get, I wasn't sure whether I could get through this first one or not, but I'll go on. I want to look at, just for a moment, creation and the laws of nature and the choices that we make. When God completed his creative work, he pronounced his creation very good. We read that in Genesis chapter 1, verse 31. But understand this, God placed all creation under laws, such as gravity, inertia. You want to know something about gravity and inertia? Trip. You understand two laws very quickly. An object in motion tends to what? Yes. And then gravity pulls you right down on your face, doesn't it? But gravity is what keeps us on the earth. And inertia, it serves its purpose as well. Right? Dan knows, you know Jeff Shane. Jeff is he teaches physics there where I'm at, and one of the schools, and he just did a series on the Bible and science, and I recommend it to you. But he went over these laws. But we have other laws as well. Heat, cold. Now, if we understand this, do we understand that man, when he's placed in such an environment as this, and he has been, he must respect these laws that govern each aspect of nature. The violation of these laws, and I don't know whether I hit that right or not, the violation of these physical laws brings various degrees of consequence. Does it not? Absolutely. God also placed man under laws that were peculiar to him. Adam was under the law to multiply and replenish the earth. He was to dress and keep the garden. He was to do all of those things. He had permission to eat of all the fruit of the garden except of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. He's restricted there. Furthermore, Eve was created and brought to Adam, and the first marriage takes place there in the garden. And so you have this law that was put in place: a man shall leave his mother and father and cleave to his wife. So you have this law of leaving and cleaving. Adam and Eve made a choice to disobey God's law, and they suffered for that. The consequence was physical death, and there was a spiritual consequence as well. As we think further about this, we understand that man as a moral being was endowed by God with the privilege and power of choice. He can, he must, and he does choose his actions, which are actions either of obedience or disobedience to the physical laws or the spiritual laws of God. Now we understand what happened in Adam's case. We need to bring that home. Whether a man deliberately or ignorantly makes a choice, his actions of obedience or disobedience, either to these physical laws of nature or these spiritual laws of nature, bring consequence, either good or bad. If I make the wrong choice, I'm going to suffer. If someone else makes the wrong choice, I'm going to suffer. Let me illustrate this for you. All right. I came through Fallensby. Now I know why I always stay on the Ohio side. So many traffic lights. All right. But there's traffic light after traffic light. Okay, so I come up to a traffic light and I stop. It turns green, I go. But this fellow over here makes a choice. You see, he says, I can beat that red light. I can do that. Must be my brother out there somewhere. I can do this. All right? And so he acts on that choice, but unfortunately, it's a bad choice, and he doesn't make it. But he does hit me. Now, I made the right choice. I waited till it was green, right? He didn't. He hits me, he T-bones me. Who's going to suffer besides him? I am. A choice I made? No, a choice he made. You see what I'm saying? See what I'm saying? That happened in Morgantown. We had a young man there who pulled out and a young lady T-boned him, snapped his neck. Yeah, sit with the grieving widow. What answer can I give her? What can I say? I knew this, but that's not the time to go into that. I knew that she made a bad choice and he suffered for it. Yes. Choices. Choices. And when we make these choices, either for good or bad, there's consequence to those choices. Parents make choices sometimes, and children and generations down the line may suffer. Elders make choices for congregations sometimes for good or bad, but it has an impact maybe for generations. Do not underestimate the power of choice. polluting the air or water or land with toxic chemicals. We choose to do that. We violate natural laws. It affects the health of people. It brings inevitable ill results. Choosing to smoke or to drink alcohol or to take or use toxic drugs, illegal, like marijuana and so forth, carries consequences to those choices that we make. A baby born with a disease like AIDS or deformity caused by parents who use drugs or alcohol suffers the consequences of the choices those parents made. Do not underestimate the power of choice. Now, God, we're free moral agents, and God has blessed us with this privilege and power of choice. But we need to understand the responsibility that comes making those choices. Choosing a pattern of conduct that violates moral laws brings spiritual, moral, and sometimes physical consequences into our life. Just read Romans chapter 1. Begin with verse 18. Read down through verse 32. And see the consequence of rejecting God. It's kind of like our society. When you read that, the depravity that existed in Paul's day among so many, it's the result of consequence, or the consequence of bad choices. So we've got a couple minutes here. I want to finish with this. I want us to understand that to avoid suffering from evil consequences from these choices, each must learn to make good choices based on God's Word. Your spiritual life may be affected, physical life may be affected. But look, understand the choice that you make may affect someone else. Parents, understand the choice that you make may affect your children. Elders, understand the choice that we make may affect our congregation, not just in the moment, but for generations to come. Let me ask you, any choices that our officials, our government officials make, do they have any impact on your life? Shake your head like this. Yes. And some of those choices that they make brings about suffering. Is that not right? Now, I'm not going to get into politics here, but I don't like paying $4.19 a gallon of gasoline. Do you? Who made that choice? I got up one morning and I petitioned my congressman and said, you know what? I would love to pay $4.50 a gallon. Can you do that for me? No. They made the choice. My wallet's the one that's suffering. I'll make up for that this week, right? You're going to make a choice. But we get the point, don't we? See how important choice is. And the correlation between choice and human suffering. I appreciate your kind attention this morning in regard to these things. If you have any questions, feel free to ask those questions. Do my best to answer those for you. Hopefully it was beneficial to you.